Right. Let's dive into this Baltimore Empowerment Zone thing.
Okay.
It was a Clinton-era initiative, right?
Yeah.
Trying to revitalize, struggling urban communities.
Yes.
But it was different from,
Yeah.
like, the old way, like what they did with Urban Renewal.
Yeah. Totally different approach.
Bulldozing neighborhoods, that kind of thing.
Completely.
This is about empowerment.
Exactly. Giving communities the power.
Giving them the resources.
To help themselves.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
So they pumped federal funding directly into these community organizations.
Mm-hmm.
They call them village centers.
Yeah, village centers. And the idea was to really get residents involved.
From the ground up.
Every step of the way.
Not just like
top down at all.
a government program.
Right.
So we've got all this research, papers and reports, breaking down like what worked, what didn't.
What the long-term impact was.
What's really interesting, though, is they created 6 of these village centers.
Okay.
Each with its own story.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting.
Some thrived, some stumbled.
Why? That's the question, right?
That's what we're going to unpack.
Exactly.
So, like, they took all the
earlier attempts at urban renewal.
Model cities.
Model cities, yeah.
Which was
trying to integrate services.
big. And then there were the CDCs.
The CDCs.
Community Development Corporations.
Already active.
But the Empowerment Zone really gave them a boost.
Huge boost.
Hold on. For those of us who don't have a PhD in this stuff.
Sure.
What are CDCs?
Okay, so CDCs, they're basically these nonprofit groups.
Okay.
Run by residents, focusing on revitalizing their own neighborhoods.
Okay.
Affordable housing.
Got it.
Job creation, community spaces.
So the Empowerment Zone wasn't just...
It wasn't starting from scratch.
Starting from scratch.
It was building on these existing efforts.
Okay.
In a more coordinated...
a community-driven way.
Absolutely. To understand how it played out, we need to meet the players.
Okay.
First, you have the Empower Baltimore Management Corporation.
Okay.
EBMC for short.
They were like the
air traffic control.
The overseers?
Here's the whole zone.
Okay.
Big picture stuff.
Yeah.
And then you've got these 6 village centers.
6 village centers.
With their own personalities.
Okay, like 6 different experiments.
Exactly, like test tubes.
Some of those test tubes.
Produced unexpected results.
Okay.
Like HEBSAG.
HEBSAG.
The historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition.
Okay.
They had a strong partnership. Johns Hopkins University and hospital.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah, raise some eyebrows.
Yeah, you think about that. Like, is the community really in control?
Right.
Or is it Johns Hopkins calling the shots?
Exactly. It created this underlying tension. This question of who was really benefiting.
But EBCF was already doing good work, right?
Yeah.
Before the Empowerment Zone even came along.
They had a good track record, but there's this long history between Johns Hopkins and the surrounding communities.
I see.
Especially when it comes to development.
So residents might have been a little wary?
Yeah, they'd seen projects that benefited the university, but displaced residents?
Or ignored their needs.
Exactly. So there was this feeling that maybe HEBSAC
wasn't truly representing them.
Right.
So it's not just about the present.
It's about that historical baggage.
That baggage.
That they had to deal with.
Okay, so HEBSAC, what happens with them?
Well, they launched some really successful programs.
Okay.
Especially in workforce development and housing.
Okay.
They helped connect residents with jobs.
Those are 2 of the core goals.
2 of the core goals of the Empowerment Zone.
Giving people the skills.
Exactly.
The opportunity to improve their lives.
Exactly, but they also faced setbacks.
Setbacks.
Some of them had to do with the political landscape.
Oh, no.
A new mayor came in. Let's just say he wasn't as supportive of HEBSAC.
As the previous mayor.
Right.
So they lost their political backing.
They did.
How did that impact them?
Pretty immediately, actually.
How so?
City agencies stopped meeting with them.
Oh.
Funding dried up.
Oh, wow.
They were basically left out of the loop.
When it came
to redevelopment projects in East Baltimore.
Tough lesson.
It is.
Even when you're doing good work.
You're still vulnerable to those shifts in the political winds.
Absolutely. So for HEBSAC,
yeah,
it was more than just the politics, right?
It was compounded by that lingering community distrust.
Even though they were getting things done?
Some residents still didn't fully trust them.
Frustrating.
So
what happened?
They're still around.
They are.
Yeah.
But
they're operating on a much smaller scale.
Kind of a bittersweet ending.
It is.
It makes you wonder what could have been.
If they'd been able to fully tap into the community's energy.
Right.
Shows just how complex this stuff can be.
So we've seen how institutional power,
can complicate things.
What about the opposite?
The opposite.
Where you have a village center led by a strong individual.
Ah, you're thinking of
East Harbor.
East Harbor.
And Clara Butler.
Yeah.
East Harbor's story.
All about the power of leadership.
Especially when you're dealing with something like gentrification.
And Clara Butler was a force to be reckoned with.
You mentioned she had deep roots in the community.
Yeah, years of community organizing.
What was her background?
She'd been working in one of the local housing projects.
Okay.
Fighting for residents' rights.
So when the Empowerment Zone came along,
she saw it as an opportunity
to really make a difference.
To really make a difference.
So she had credibility.
She did.
A deep understanding of the community's needs.
But East Harbor was dealing with gentrification.
Right in the thick of it.
Smack dab in the middle of it.
How did that impact things?
East Harbor was in a prime location.
Where?
Right on the waterfront.
Oh, wow.
Sandwiched between downtown Baltimore and Fells Point.
Oh, so they were right in the path of development.
Exactly.
And that created tension.
All sorts of tension.
How so?
Some residents welcomed the investment.
Okay.
Saw it as a chance to improve the area.
Makes sense.
Others were terrified of being priced out of their homes.
Right. So Clara Butler.
Caught in the middle.
How'd she handle it?
Masters at balancing different interests.
Okay.
On the one hand, a fierce advocate for the community.
Pushing back against developers.
Demanding that residents have a voice.
But on the other hand,
pragmatic.
So she wasn't just resisting change.
She knew gentrification was happening.
She wanted to make sure it benefited the community.
Exactly.
Were there any specific projects where you saw that?
One that stands out?
Yeah.
Redevelopment of the Flag House Courts public housing project.
Okay, I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
It was controversial.
Very.
A lot of residents were worried
about getting pushed out.
Rightfully so.
They had every right to be concerned.
Yeah. So what happened?
Clara Butler fought hard to make sure existing residents
got priority
in the new housing units.
Okay.
And had access to support services.
So she was tough.
But compassionate.
She understood the need for change.
But also the human cost.
Right, in the end.
The Flag House Courts redevelopment
was considered a success.
A relative success.
Not everyone was happy.
But it showed that gentrification could be managed.
In a way that benefited some of the existing residents.
Well, at least some.
That's pretty remarkable.
It is.
Considering all the forces she was up against.
She was up against a lot.
Did she do anything else?
To ensure the community had a say.
Yeah.
She was instrumental in establishing a community development corporation.
A CDC.
A CDC for East Harbor.
Remind me what a CDC is.
Nonprofit, community-based organization.
Okay.
Focuses on revitalizing neighborhoods.
So by creating a CDC...
She was giving East Harbor a more direct role.
In shaping the development.
You weren't just reacting.
They were taking control.
Exactly. And that CDC...
The East Harbor CDC...
is still active today.
Carrying on her work.
Carrying on her work.
So her legacy lives on.
It does.
Not just in the buildings, but in the institutions.
Powerful legacy.
Okay, so we've seen the power of strong leadership.
Mm.
Now I'm curious about planning.
Planning.
You mentioned Washington Village had a really detailed plan.
They did.
How did that contribute to their success?
Washington Village is a great example of how planning can make a real difference.
Okay.
They were very strategic in their approach.
And they had a diverse community.
They did.
You mentioned that they were in a more diverse area.
Than some of the other village centers?
How did that play a role?
They had a mix of residents, businesses, institutions.
Yeah.
Were really good at bringing everyone to the table.
To create a shared vision.
Exactly.
So they were intentional about building consensus.
From the get-go.
And that's where the planning comes in.
The planning is key.
They weren't just reacting to problems.
They took a step back.
And asked,
what kind of community do we want to be?
What are our long-term goals?
And what steps do we need to take to get there?
So they were thinking strategically?
Very much so.
Did they actually stick to the plan, though?
They were serious about implementation.
It wasn't just a document.
It was a roadmap.
Yeah.
Guiding their decisions.
Okay.
Measuring their progress.
So it was a living, breathing guide.
Exactly.
And that's why they were successful.
One of the key reasons.
Clear vision.
Plan to achieve it.
Commitment to follow through.
Absolutely.
Okay, so planning played a big role.
It did.
What else contributed?
They were also really good at building partnerships.
Partnerships?
Like with the University of Maryland, Baltimore.
Okay.
Tri-Churches Housing.
So they leveraged those resources.
And the expertise.
Smart move.
It was. And they also had a strong board of directors.
Providing oversight.
And guidance.
So the really effective combination, a shared vision, a detailed plan.
Strong partnerships, effective leadership.
Okay, I'm seeing a theme here.
Yeah.
The village centers that thrived.
They were the ones who were proactive
Strategic.
and thought about the long term.
They were building for the future.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing not every village center had that kind of success.
You're right, and that's where the lessons from the village centers that struggled become so valuable.
What do we learn from those?
They show us what can happen.
When you don't have that solid foundation.
Of planning, leadership, and unity.
Poppleton, for example.
Poppleton.
What went wrong there?
Well, remember those political pressures.
The ones that led to communities being grouped together.
That didn't really mesh.
Right, those forced marriages.
Exactly. Poppleton ended up lumped in with some wealthier, more politically connected neighborhoods.
I see.
And those different interests.
Created tension.
A lot of tension.
Oh, so.
The village center's board ended up dominated by a small group of people.
Who weren't really representative
of the community.
So that sense of ownership was missing.
Exactly.
That the village center belonged to the residents.
And without that shared sense of purpose, their efforts were fragmented.
They couldn't come up with a clear vision.
They made questionable financial decisions.
Okay.
They never really engaged the community.
In a meaningful way.
It was like too many cooks in the kitchen.
With different recipes.
Exactly. And it highlights a crucial lesson.
Which is?
If you don't have that foundation of trust and shared purpose,
it's going to be difficult.
Very difficult to achieve lasting change.
Okay, what about Harlem Park?
Harlem Park.
The one that shut down.
Due to financial mismanagement.
Was that just bad actors?
It's a sad story.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that even good intentions
can go astray
without strong leadership and accountability.
They were the smallest
and most distressed
of all the village centers.
Starting from a position of disadvantage.
Facing more challenges.
With fewer resources.
It's like they were trying to build a house on sand.
Powerful image.
And then to make matters worse,
they lacked strong leadership.
Okay.
Their board was ineffective.
And their executive director
was accused of misusing funds.
So they had all these external pressure.
And then those internal weaknesses.
Made them even more vulnerable.
Exactly. And that's a pattern we see a lot in community development efforts.
When you're dealing with limited resources.
And complex challenges.
You need strong leadership.
And accountability.
Absolutely essential.
Trying to sail a ship through a storm.
Without a captain.
Exactly. And sadly, Harlem Park's ship
ran aground.
Yeah.
Okay, we've seen how division, lack of leadership,
systemic disadvantages
really undermine these efforts.
They can.
What about self-motivated?
Self-motivated.
The village center that split off from Sandtown Winchester?
Yeah, interesting story.
Why did they break away?
Well, the Sandtown Winchester initiative was a large-scale effort
led by
to revitalize
a very distressed area of West Baltimore. I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
It was pretty ambitious.
It was. A lot of big names involved.
And they had some successes.
They did, particularly with housing.
But there was this growing feeling
among some residents
that they weren't being fully included
in the decision-making.
They felt like outsiders were calling the shots.
It was a question of control.
Who has it?
Who exercises it?
Who benefits?
Exactly. And that's where the name self-motivated comes from.
They wanted to take control
of their own destiny.
Shape the revitalization.
In a way that reflected their values.
So they were rejecting that top-down approach.
And demanding more self-determination.
Did it help them?
Initially, they had a lot of momentum.
Okay.
Charismatic leader.
Okay.
Secured funding from the Empowerment Zone.
All right.
Launched a number of programs.
But then things got complicated.
They did.
Their leader,
the one who brought them together,
was accused of misusing funds.
Oh, wow.
And forced to step down.
That's a huge blow. It was. And they never really recovered.
They lost their captain.
And the ship started to drift.
They also struggled with managing expectations.
They did.
Because they wanted more control.
They wanted to be the ones calling the shots.
But that also means you have to deliver.
You have to deliver.
And when those changes didn't happen fast enough,
some residents became disillusioned.
It's one thing to demand control.
It's another to exercise it effectively.
And then there's the issue of sustainability.
Right. They were heavily dependent on Empowerment Zone funding.
And when that ran out,
they didn't have the capacity to keep going.
Like a plan that grew too quickly?
Without developing strong roots.
So, self-motivated.
Withered away.
A victim of both internal and external challenges.
It's a sad story.
But it highlights a really important point.
About community development.
Sustainability is key.
It's not enough to just get things started.
You need to create systems.
Structures.
That can outlast any individual leader.
Or funding stream.
True empowerment isn't just about taking control.
It's about building the capacity to maintain that control.
Creating institutions
That can carry the torch.
even when that initial spark fades.
Well said.
So we've seen both sides of the coin now.
We have.
The successes and the failures.
The ups and downs.
What are the key takeaways?
What have we learned from the Baltimore Empowerment Zone?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that community development, it's complicated.
It's messy.
It's messy, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But it is possible.
Yeah, that's what struck me too.
It's not just some, utopian ideal people can come together.
And shape their own neighborhoods.
Make a real difference.
The Empowerment Zone, it wasn't perfect.
No experiment is.
But it showed that when you invest in people,
Give them a voice.
a seat at the table,
Things can change.
like think about East Harbor,
East Harbor,
Washington Village.
they had huge challenges.
Right.
They also had some impressive wins.
And they did it in their own way, right?
Absolutely. Each village center had its own personality, its own flavor.
Its own approach, yeah.
That's what makes it so fascinating.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. Every neighborhood's different.
Different history, different dynamics,
Different challenges.
different opportunities, exactly.
So you can't just come in with some cookie-cutter approach.
No.
You have to listen to the people who live there.
Understand their needs.
Build on their strengths.
It's about context.
Context is key.
Absolutely.
But you also have to be prepared for the unexpected. Right.
Oh.
Community development, it's a long game.
It is.
There are going to be bumps in the road.
The setbacks.
Think about Poppleton.
Harlem Park.
Self-motivated.
They all stumbled,
Yeah.
despite their good intentions.
And those failures,
Just as important as the successes.
they teach us
Valuable lesson.
about leadership, about planning.
About sustainability.
So for those of us who are,
Yeah.
trying to make a difference in our own communities,
What's the best way to approach this?
what are the key principles?
Yeah. I think the first principle,
Yeah.
embrace complexity.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Community development.
Yeah.
It's not about finding easy answers.
Right.
It's about navigating these messy realities.
And messy.
Recognizing there will be different perspectives.
Different priorities.
Sometimes even conflicting goals.
So it's not about imposing our own ideas,
No.
our solutions.
It's about listening,
Learning,
building consensus.
that's hard.
It's a lot harder than just bulldozing ahead
With our own plans.
with our own ideas.
But if we really want to empower a community,
we have to let go of that control.
embrace the messiness.
Collaborative decision-making.
Might not be efficient.
But it's more effective in the long run
And more sustainable.
and more sustainable.
Okay, so embrace complexity, build consensus.
And don't be afraid to ask for help.
Okay, that's good advice.
There are so many resources out there.
People who've been down this road before.
Connect with other organizations, find
Yeah.
mentors,
Learn from the successes
and the failures.
of others.
Absolutely.
And don't get discouraged.
When things get tough,
Because they will.
they will. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
You need patience,
Persistence
a willingness to keep learning.
and adapting.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the Baltimore Empowerment Zone,
Yeah.
I'm left with this feeling of, I don't know,
Cautious optimism.
cautious optimism. Yeah.
I think that's fair.
On the one hand,
The challenges are huge.
but on the other hand,
There are so many inspiring examples
of communities coming together.
creating positive change.
The Empowerment Zone is a bold experiment,
It was.
and it offers valuable lessons,
For anyone who cares about
building stronger,
more equitable communities,
and it shows us
that while there's no easy fix,
there's always hope,
there's always hope.
and that hope lies in the power of people
Working together.
learning from their mistakes
Never giving up.
on that dream of a better future.
Well said.
So to our listeners, as you continue your own explorations,
Of community development,
remember the lessons we've uncovered today.
embrace complexity.
Seek out collaboration
And never underestimate the power of a shared vision.
and keep asking questions.
Keep asking questions.
That's how we learn. That's how we grow.
That's how we create change.
Thanks for joining us.
On this deep dive, it really is. It's about understanding that every community, every neighborhood, it's unique.
Right, and we saw that with the 6 village centers.
Exactly. Each one had its own
personnel,
way of doing things.
its own set of challenges.
And that's why there's
Yeah.
no magic formula for community development.
No one size fits all.
It's not a recipe you can just follow.
Right.
You have to really be in tune with the community itself.
So what advice would you give to, I don't know, someone who's just starting out?
In community development.
Yeah, someone who's passionate about making a difference.
I would say, first of all, be patient.
Okay.
Patience.
A long game, you know?
Not a sprint.
Not a sprint, exactly.
That's a marathon.
And second, be humble.
Humble. Okay, you don't have all the answers.
No one does.
Be willing to learn from others.
From the community itself.
From the community, from other organizations.
And be willing to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah. You're gonna make mistakes.
Because we all do.
It's part of the process.
But you learn from them.
You learn, you adapt, you keep moving forward.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Baltimore Empowerment Zone,
what are your final thoughts?
I'm struck by how, I don't know...
how complex it all is.
Complex, yeah, and challenging.
It's definitely not easy work.
But also how inspiring it is.
Yeah, the resilience of these communities.
The passion of the people involved.
Even when they faced setbacks.
They kept fighting for what they believed in.
That's the heart of community development.
A belief that things can get better.
That people can make a difference.
So to our listeners...
out there...
if you're feeling inspired by this story...
yeah.
Don't be afraid to get involved.
Find a cause you care about.
Connect with people in your community.
And make a difference.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Baltimore Empowerment Zone.
It's been a pleasure.